They had white Jews who had immigrated from Europe and black Jews who had originally come from Jerusalem at the fall of Jerusalem. Had an uninterrupted straight line of connection from the fall of Jerusalem to India. All over the world there are black Jews. But the Zionist Jews who had been converted to Judaism have taken over the control of the definition of what Judaism is, as white people do with anything. If they come into it, they take it over and define what it is, as you stated in your introductory statement. So we have to remember that white Jews, when you see them on the street, are not the Jews of the biblical period. And that sometimes confuses black people who ought to be black Christian nationalists.
One thing, I'd like to begin by establishing some kind of a frame of reference. Exactly what are we talking about? And I think in order to do this, I'm going to try to dismiss the subject, then come back to it and deal with it. There is no such thing as a race. Nature created no races. Man created races, racial classifications, and he had his own reason for doing it. Now, who benefited from this artificial creation at first? Who benefits from it now? Now, let's look at the historical roots of this whole thing, and you're not going to understand it until you understand the implications, the far-reaching effects of the opening up of the so-called New World, Christopher Columbus and other thugs coming, suppressing the Indians, and finding a justification for this kind of thing. Let's look at Europe in the 15th and the 16th century, because racism has its roots in that second rise of Europe in the 15th and the 16th century. They had to justify what they were going to do to most of mankind. They were about to take over the whole world. Now, there's a myth about an argument about whether the world was round or flat. That's an old wives' tale. The European had gained enough knowledge and had enough guns, and he had been hungry enough within the body of Europe until he decided that he was going to go out and take the world, be it round or flat. Now, in order to understand the religious basis of racism, we have to go back to a papal bull that the Pope issued in 1455 in an argument between Portugal and Spain. He turned to them impatiently and said, "You are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people." And it just so happens that most of the so-called infidels were non-European people, non-white people. Europe not only had its basis for racism, it had its basis for the slave trade, and this same basis would be good in the colonial system that followed. Racism was created to justify the slave trade, to justify the colonial system, and to justify the utter ruthlessness that had to go into the making of modern capitalism.
Good morning, Africans. I hope you're fine where you are, and if you're not fine, I pray that you do fine. Yes. So today, I want us to discuss in a very, very important thing that has always baffled the mind of the wise, has baffled the mind of the knowledgeable. It has baffled the minds of the understandable people. I'm speaking about the concept of race. Many people have attempted to discuss race, its origin, and why it was formed. You understand? We have people like Marcus Garvey. We have people like Tim Wise, who is also a wise white person. We also have Dr. Joy de Grey, who in her theory, PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, has tried and explained what is racism, in what she embedded the concept of cognitive dissonance in why racism exists. And so, to me, I think racism exists because somebody had to suppress their feelings. Somebody had to suppress their humanity in order for them to do that which was not inhuman. You understand? Racism was invented for there to be slavery. Racism was invented for there to be colonialism. You understand? But the best understanding according to what I think, is that which is given by Black Americans. Black Americans are the ones who are facing the purest form, the concentrated form of racism. And we've had doctors from institutions such as Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Harvard University professors, attempting to provide what they think is racism. Because to me, not even to me, what I know is something I have gathered from the books. I know we have three races. We have Negroids, we have Mongoloids, who are the Asians, and then we have Caucasians. So we have three races. And these three races, I discovered them through my history textbook. You understand? If you read the book that was written by Charles Darwin, The Theory of Evolution. Yes. So without further ado, I want us to watch this video by these professors, listen to what they have to say about racism, and then by the end of the video, I'll give you a critical analysis of what I will have gathered from the video. So let's dive in without further ado.
Or proof for the racism of the Christian church is the simple fact that white people have pretended for so long that Jesus was white, and that they've had the necessity to interpret Jesus as being white, when essentially white Christianity is racially, is historically false and theologically absurd, and practically, in terms of its effect on black people, it's a debasing institution that enslaves black people. I think we have to understand, though, that we're not making moral judgments here. Any institution that exists in any society exists to serve the interests of the people who set it up. And Christianity began as a black man's religion. It's an African religion. We have to remember that Israel went into Egypt with 70 people, and after approximately 750 years came out with over 2 million people, and hordes of other slaves who came out and became also part of the emerging new nation of Israel. So Israel, the biblical Israel, was a black nation, an African nation that came out of Africa and kept constant ties with Africa. And so we have to remember then that Jesus was a black Messiah, not a white Messiah, and he comes out of the whole historical background of Africa, of African traditions, of African history, of African culture, the concept of communalism, the concept of a chosen people, the concept of kingdom of God on earth. All these things were out of African tradition, not out of the white man's tradition. And Jesus was essentially a revolutionary Messiah who was trying to lead a black people in a revolt, in a struggle and conflict with a white Gentile oppressor. So the whole church has to be viewed from the point of view of the white oppressor. The white oppressor has one kind of Christianity, has one kind of church. The black church has to become independent and go back to the historic African roots of Christianity, because the slave church that the white man set up for black people tends to continue the enslavement of black people. So the black church has to become, again, a revolutionary instrument in the hands of black people, controlled by black people, fighting, as Jesus fought, for the liberation of black people against white Gentile oppression.
I'd like to continue from Reverend Clarke's point and deal briefly with image, because image is the paramount factor in keeping racism alive. Now, exactly when did the Christian church become white? In as much as Christ is described in early literature as being swarthy and having hair like sheep's wool, and that's surely not a Caucasian's hair. The first image of the church, the first image of the Madonna, was the black Madonnas, and these black Madonnas were very prevalent in the churches of Europe. Up until the 16th and the 17th century, there was no white Madonnas in the churches of Europe. And some of the churches of Europe to this very day have black Madonnas. All right. At what point did Christianity become all white? And at what point did Christ become a blonde, blue-eyed person that hangs in your churches, and with a haircut and a uniform? He'd probably be a good Nazi. All right. One thing the Jews seem to have forgotten is that the picture of Christ, as in present-day literature, is an insult to them, because there's nothing particularly Jewish about him, physically or otherwise. All right. Now, another thing we're going to have to look at seriously is that when the Europeans projected themselves out into the broader world, they not only colonized most of mankind, they colonized the teaching of history itself. And gradually, so many things black became white.
I'd like to just say one little word about when did Christianity become white. The process by which Christianity became gradually to be interpreted as being white began at a very early point with Apostle Paul, who wrote the epistles of the New Testament, and who was, even at that time, with black Israel and black Jews, an Uncle Tom Jew. He was an Uncle Tom black Jew, and he wanted to identify with white Gentile world. He prided himself on being a Pharisee, but more on being having Roman citizenship. So as soon as he had sunstroke on the Damascus Road and said he's been converted, he started out to take the Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, to the Gentile world. Now, he could not take the revolutionary teachings that Jesus had actually taught, because Jesus was a zealot, and they were engaged in revolution. I mean, open revolution. He was one of the zealot leaders at that time. So he couldn't take that to the Gentile world. So he had to make an image, a symbol out of Jesus on the cross, which was compatible with the heathen symbolism of the Roman and Greco-Roman heathen world. So he made Jesus a kind of a heathen symbol that he could take to the Gentile world. And the whole writings of the Apostle Paul tend then to destroy the basic African background of Christianity and to make it compatible with the Greco-Roman heathen world. So it began there. But the actual identification of Christianity as being a white religion didn't really take place until the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, when the pictures were being painted and paid for by the Catholic Church. At that point, white people had decided to declare black people inferior. And so the whole concept of Jesus being black, or the Madonna being black, was unacceptable to white people at all. A whole new type of slavery was beginning to emerge. The old type of slavery in Egypt, Joseph was a slave who rose to be second only to Pharaoh. A whole different concept of slavery. You were a slave only in the terms that your labor was taken. But gradually the white man declared that anyone who was non-white, who was enslaved, was declared to be inferior, therefore had a whole different kind of existence. So the whole gradual thing was a part of the slavery process that Dr. Clarke mentioned, a part of the betrayal of the Apostle Paul, and a part of the fall of Jerusalem and the fort, and where Jews were scattered all over the world. We have to remember one thing I think is very important, that the white Jews that we see today have no bloodline connection with the Jews of the biblical period. They were converted to Judaism in Europe and in Russia. They were converted and have no bloodline connection with the black Jews who make up the biblical Israel that the Bible writes about and of which Jesus was a part.
Well, what happened to the black Jews?
The black Jews are still in existence. There are black Jews in America. There are black Jews all over Africa. There are black Jews in Palestine. There are black Jews everywhere. Diane's daughter complained not more than 2 years ago that black Jews had moved on either side of her house, and therefore her property had depreciated in Palestine. Black Jews had depreciated her property. Jews had moved directly from Palestine to India, and the community celebrated its 1900th anniversary or something, and they had white Jews who had emigrated from Europe and black Jews who had originally come from Jerusalem at the fall of Jerusalem, had an uninterrupted straight line of connection from the fall of Jerusalem to India. All over the world there are black Jews, but the Zionist Jews who had been converted to Judaism have taken over the control of the definition of what Judaism is, as white people do with anything. If they come into it, they take it over and define what it is, as you stated in your introductory statement. So we have to remember that white Jews, when you see them on the street, are not the Jews of the biblical period. And that sometimes confuses black people who ought to be black Christian nationalists.
See, one of the things I'm hearing from both of the brothers is that not only have whites tried to deceive blacks about the realities, but they in effect, deceived each other about the realities. That is, I'm sitting here thinking about the institutions in society, all of which are racist, you know, which whites created and which whites have used in order to advance themselves, but never at any point stopping recognizing, for instance, that the prisons have nothing to do with rehabilitation, or that the courts, in most cases, really have nothing to do with justice.
What about schools?
What
specifically is a racist pattern, in your opinion, as far as the educational process or the schools is concerned?
Well, I would say that the overwhelming educational process that is racist is a tendency to educate people against their own interests. That is, to educate black kids to hate themselves, to educate blacks to feel alienated from their own people, to educate blacks to become advocates for the mainstream against their own community.
Well, how is that done, specifically?
Well, I would say that, the traditional educational process is, number one, the concealing of the truth about history, the educating of black students away from the problems of their own community. For instance, very few black students on college campuses are enabled to use their minds to work on the problems that bedevil the black community, like sickle cell anemia, or the housing problems, the drug problems that are imposed on the black community by the outside. Very few black students on white campuses or any campus are spending their energies and their minds on trying to find solutions to those problems. In most cases, they're being educated, say, with the drug problem, to learn how to use methadone.
Now, look, let's deal with our own historical naivete. Until we deal with it, we're not going any place. Black people have no right to expect anything from this establishment because it wasn't set up for them. They wasn't brought to this country to be given democracy. They was brought to this country to do some work, to labor and to obey. And once the machines made a whole lot of these jobs obsolete, it tended to make a whole lot of the people obsolete. Now, we keep worrying about the American promise and the American dream, and we forget it wasn't made to us. And the white man has not betrayed anything because he didn't promise us anything in the first place. Now, the role of institutions in a society is to reflect the power that controls that society. So we have American institutions arrayed against us, and we naively expect these institutions to reform themselves, because if they reform themselves, that's tantamount to presiding over their own demise.
I'd like to say one thing on that. I think the question you asked is how do the schools accomplish this? I mean, you were concerned about the process. I think we got to understand that there's no such thing as objective truth, which is implicit in everything Dr. Clarke says. That white people use the institutions to accomplish white purpose. The white purpose is to maintain a power position and keep everybody else in a subordinate, powerless kind of position. Now that's the institution's purpose, and that's the way it functions and how it functions. And we got to realize then that everything that the schools teach is designed to fit into that purpose. The schools teach not objective truth, but what the white man wants to project as truth. Now that's from the very kindergarten right straight on through.
Well, for example, what?
Sociology. Sociology is not a science in the sense that it's dealing objectively with the way people live together. It's dealing with the white man's pattern of living together as the norm by which we judge how other people live. If you live like white people live, then you're living the way you are supposed to live. If not, you're either primitive or insane as a people. Psychologically, it's the same thing. Psychology does not deal with any objective kind of discussion or development of how people live or analysis of how people function as individuals, but how does the white man function? If the white man does it this way, then this is the norm by which we judge all other people. If the white man is violent, then actually all people have to be violent to be normal. If you're not violent, obviously there's something wrong with you and you should be in an insane asylum. The whole pattern that's set up as a norm for human behavior by psychologists, the whole library full of it. Psychiatrists, everybody that's dealing with it is dealing with it from a white point of view. So they teach white children, black children and white children, to look through white eyes. From the kindergarten on, the black child is beginning to look at the world and interpret it through white eyes. Everything he is wrong. Everything that exists in his community is wrong. And we ought to declare that white music really is no good, that white psychology is no good. The white man either acts like we do or he's insane. White sociology is no good. The very structure of white society indicates that white people, obviously in social structure, are either insane or they're abnormal. So we have to project then a black psychology, a black sociology, a black music, a black history that takes in the realities and that is essentially sound, as opposed to the mythology that the white man has developed out of his own ignorance, for one thing, out of his non-creativity, because the white man has never created anything. He's stolen things but never created anything. He cannot actually deal with history because history is a recital of his total failure and his total absence of making any genuine contribution to the world.
If we define a black psychology, a black sociology, where will we use these?
Where would we use? We'd use them first to unscramble our own mixed up minds. If we could understand that black psychology is the psychology that the black man has to have if he's going to escape from powerlessness in a white man's world. Now, the struggle is a struggle between black people for power and white people to keep power. Now, all we're dealing with is a power struggle. Every institution that the white man has, he uses in this power struggle. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing immoral about it. Any people would do that. When we get on top, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to use every institution to perpetuate black power. And the white man's going to have to fight up from the bottom again for another, 100 million years trying to get back to a position of power. There's nothing wrong with fighting for power, but the thing that's wrong is for powerless people to accept their powerlessness and to accept the definition by which they are maintained powerless and to accept the institutions which perpetuate their powerlessness. So that's why I think the black church has to become a power base for black people in changing this total institutional conception structure that black people are living in. We've got to use it as a base to spin off all the institutions that black people need that come from a black perspective, a black orientation, and are concerned with black power as opposed to white power.
We need to look at what kind of societies did black people come out of? What happened before this interference? Now, we came out of basic pluralistic societies, but we came out of sharing societies where nobody was very rich and nobody at all was poor. Now, an African in this society would no more kill a deer and say, this is mine, than he would fly, because he didn't think that way. He thought of all property as belonging to the total community. Now, we were brought into a society as slaves just at the time the concept of private property and capitalism was getting well underway with the backing of the church. Now, there is a clash between the values of, the best values of the society we came out of and the society that enslaved us. And too many of us are tied up with these values, the sacredness of private property. What is so sacred about private property? What is so sacred about one man taking upon himself more than he could use in a lifetime while people walking by this mountain of wealth starving? Nothing particularly sacred about this. And these things did not exist in these old societies until these old societies began to have internal differences, and the European came in, and the African naively permitted him to arbitrate an African family dispute until we understand that up on sight, the African invited the European for dinner. That's the first thing he did. The Indian invited the European for dinner. The Polynesians invited the European for dinner. Now, if you invite people for dinner, first place, you've got plenty dinner, and you have a society that is traditionally hospitable to strangers. The Indians invited Christopher Columbus for dinner, the first thing they did. All right, now let's look at what was happening inside of Christopher Columbus's mind, and we can go to his own diary for this. He said, I wonder why they are so friendly. They'll be easier to conquer than I thought they would be. I wonder why they're bringing such small amounts of gold. I wonder where the mines are. His intentions were not good. It wasn't good then. The intentions are not good now. And the black man is still hung up with this dinner invitation, this kindness, with the thought that if you treat a person humanely, that he will act humanely toward you. Black people have not seen white people at all. That is why they can't deal with them.
I want to say one thing. I think we have to be careful, black people. We too much tied up in this what's good and what's bad. I think what we need to begin to look at is what's real. Now, I don't care whether it's good or bad. I just care whether it works, whether it doesn't work, whether it helps black people or doesn't help black people.
And so, after watching this video with the pastor and the two doctors giving their perspective on racism, I would say that it is important to realize that racism is a social construct. It's a social construct that has been made to be a nominal cultural narrative by the white person. Somebody had find an excuse for their evil deeds, you understand? And we have different avenues of constructing, a thought or a school of thought. Let me call it a school of thought, because I think racism Racism is an evil school of thought, and here is why. Remember, when we are in school, a lot of knowledge we acquire from school and a lot of knowledge we acquire from the churches. Moral values are acquired from two places, schools and churches. It's not from home. Home might add a very small thing, but where we spend most of our time as kids is at school and it's at the churches. And now these two places, or religion, these two places, the white person or the white imperialist had to make sure he had them corrupted. He had to make sure that these two institutions were following his methods. These two institutions were teaching his messages. You understand? He had to make sure that these two institutions were working his evil deeds. Now, concerning the black Jesus, I don't want to delve much into that. As you know, I don't really like discussing religion, particularly Christianity. I don't really love discussing it. It is true that in the book, in the holy book, the Bible, it has been written that there is someone who is Jesus, and he has woolly hair. Woolly hair are not a characteristics of a white person. We know they have long hair, long hair. You understand? But woolly hair is characteristics of black people. Black people are the people who mostly have this hair, the ones I have seen. And so Jesus was not white and he was also not black. According to me, we have different types of blacks. It's not like, even if you look at me, I'm not totally black, but I'm considered black. There's a person who is so white and is considered black. You understand? Now, what really defines an African or a black person is the characteristics they bear. It's not the color of the skin. It might be or it might not be, but it's the characteristics they bear. It starts from the hair. Hair is the number one distinguishing factor to tell a black person from a white person. But now, the Reverend is saying the white person went ahead and changed the image of the Christ to become a white person. That one I do not agree as well. Jesus was not a white person with blue eyes. No, he wasn't that. Jesus Christ was like the people of his times. He was like a Middle Eastern. Middle East is the part of the world where it touches the whole world. It touches Europe, it touches Africa, it touches Asia. It touches the whole world. You understand? It's in the central part. It's in the central part. And so Jesus Christ is a person of Middle East, of those times, the original people of those times. Perhaps the original people of those times were kind of having black characteristics. I don't know. But I know that the white person reached to the church and he changed the image of Jesus Christ. After that, he went to the schools and he started teaching that his ways were the right ways. In a way that whatever the white person does, even if it is wrong, it is always right. Now, the white person became the author of objective truth. The white person became the author of objective morality. And that was wrong. Understand? We still experience, in as much as this video was made in 1971, we still have the impacts of this up to date. You understand? When a white person says that as a particular African president is good, they will fight hard to put that person in power. And if there is somebody ahead of him, they will try so hard to uproot them to place that person. They'll try and convince the masses that this is the right person because they have their own agendas. They have superpowers, yeah. They have the technological know-how and all that. But sometimes might does not make right. Might does not make right. And now we've been brainwashed over the many, many years to believe that we have to believe what they say. Anything they say is right. We don't have to question. And this is what these three doctors were questioning. There's nothing like racism. There's nothing like racism. Because in the concept of, not the concept, in Christianity, if you think that somebody is greater than you, if you think that you are greater than someone else, you are not a Christian. Because the one true God made us equal. And now, the white person had to override even the holy books. He had to override the true gospel to fit in his ideas, to fit his school of thought. And this This is where we have the problems, we as Africans. We sometimes follow blindly. We sometimes just... Now, one thing you as an African should realize is this: you are not a fool. You are not somebody who will just follow another person blindly. We Africans, we have our own moral values. We Africans, we have it in ourselves. We have the technological know-how to do things in our own ways. We don't really need to depend on someone else. Someone who has proven very many times over the years that they cannot be trusted. Anywhere they go, they will always be harmed. I'm speaking of the white imperialist. This is this person I'm speaking of. Imperialism in Africa is really affecting the growth and development of Africa. So going back and discussing the origin of this imperialism, going back and discussing the concept of race, whether is race a real thing or is just a human invention that is made and developed to torture black people or other humans, we really have to go back to such kind of conversations to understand where we are going and where we left. You understand? Because even if you want to cure a disease, you first have to know how it survives. You have to know how it reproduces. From there is where you can make a vaccine or you can make a cure for the disease. These conversations are important for Africans to know. Thanks for watching, guys. Remember, if you want to know to cure a disease, you have to go back to the roots. And the roots of racism are far much fetched from the past. Now, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, kindly give me a thumbs up. I'll so much appreciate. See you in the next vid.